Welcome to Stepping Outside the Frame, meet the new generation of image makers presented by the BFA Photography program and the MA Fashion Studies program at Parsons School of Design. My name is Joel Towers. I'm the Dean of Parsons, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you tonight. This conversation tonight is part of a conversation called the Nth Degree Series, which is a curated series of events across the New School featuring thinkers, visionaries, and creators who define the cutting edge. The series continues the New School's century-long tradition of forward thinking by hosting lectures, performances, panels, and other public programs that highlight the work of individuals from diverse fields, from artists and activists to scientists and policy experts who develop bold, creative solutions to today's most pressing problems. One of the reasons this event is part of the Nth Degree is that this particular group of photographers, image makers, artists, creative individuals are all challenging normative stereotypes and visual identities. The conversation tonight will explore representation in fashion and in the media, seeking to identify and address the social and systemic issues that generate short-sighted, stereotypical images of marginalized individuals in the media, and introduce a new generation of photographers and image makers who will share their creative journey and impart wisdom when it comes to creating your own lane in the industry. Their full bios Kim will give you in a moment, but I will just mention, and we are incredibly honored to have these guests with us, Myles, Loftin, and I think we're going to be going mostly, no, my order is not their order, but I'll say them. Myles Loftin, photographer who is currently also in our BFA photography program, whose hooded series you'll hear more about tonight, exploring images of young black men, is infused with a sense of belonging and sensitivity. Joshua Kissi, second from the end, creative director and co-founder of TONL, which is a stock image platform that diversifies stock images that populate in search engines and ultimately reassess the connotation, the connections between keywords and images. Kimberly Drew, next to Myles, is social media manager at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and has democratized contemporary art using social media and amplified the voice for Black artists. Peter Ash Lee, at the very end, photographer and creative director of Corduroy, and Jamilla Okubo, Illustrator, Parsons alum from our BFA Integrated Design program from 2016, who brings her aesthetic of a lived African diasporic experience to storied luxury fashion houses like Dior. And this whole conversation will be moderated by Kim Jenkins, a member of the Parsons faculty. Kim is both an alum of Parsons, the MA Fashion Studies program from 2013, and also teaches here Fashion and Race, Advanced Research Seminar, Fashion Culture, across the schools of fashion and art and design, history and theory. And her teaching is having an extraordinary impact. And indeed, just a couple of days ago, the university announced that Kim will be receiving the 2017-18 Award for Outstanding Achievement in Social Justice Teaching. So come to graduation and applaud her much louder than that next time. I just wanted to leave my brief introduction with one thought and hand it over to Kim. In thinking about tonight's discussion, I was reminded of the 1972 John Berger series, both BBC series and the accompanying multivalent publication Ways of Seeing, which in its time challenged the dominant narratives of visual culture and art history. Still read today by generations of Parsons students, the opening essay challenges the way we describe the world in which we live and how we come to understand it. Berger writes that seeing comes before words. The child looks and recognizes before it can speak. But there is also another sense in which seeing comes before words. It is seeing which establishes our place in the surrounding world. We explain that world with words, but words can never undo the fact that we are surrounded by it. And I always come back to this Berger quote because I think this relationship between seeing and knowing is never settled. And the artists today, the creative individuals here on this conversation, are seeking to also explain to us the ways in which what we are not seeing or what has been marginalized is not part of that spoken world or needs to become part of it through this transformation. And so it's a very important conversation. I thank you all for being here, and it's a great pleasure to hand this over to this year's award-winning faculty, Kim Jenkins.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been, for the past couple of months, a labor of love for Myles and myself. Myles Loftin and I met in my class, Fashion and Race, last fall. I put on a talk on September 11th of last year called Fashion, Culture, and Justice, a New York Fashion Week Dialogue. It was a panel discussion that was also dealing with kind of racialized identities, a sense of belonging, and how we can use fashion to kind of implore equity and social justice. And I put that together with someone whom I admire in the fashion industry, designer Becca McCarran. And Myles was in the audience, and at the beginning of this year, he reached out to me and kind of inspired in some ways by that talk. Myles was saying, I want to put on a talk that reaches out to students and other creatives in the field who just want to kind of gain a broader perspective of what's possible. Seeing people who are doing great things in the field, who have built a career, carved out a space for themselves, and can provide inspiration. I want to create a space like that. How do we do this? How do we make something like this happen? So we're very thankful for Anthony Curry from the New School for helping coordinate this entire event, along with Alexis Watts from the Integrate series. We are incredibly grateful for the BFA Photography Department. We are incredibly grateful to the MA Fashion Studies Department here for supporting us, seeing our vision, and realizing that this is a discussion that needs to be had, and we need to hold this space to talk about what's possible when it comes to photography, images, illustrations, and sort of recognize and celebrate these change makers who are in the industry doing courageous work, kind of carving out a space for themselves where there wasn't a space. So we're thrilled to have this conversation tonight to kind of explore this topic. And as far as the framework for tonight's discussion, I'm going to facilitate the conversation with our panelists for about 30 minutes, and we want to use the remaining 30 minutes to make it about you, creating a space for you to engage with our panelists and ask questions and kind of build a dialogue or a conversation about representation, diversity, inclusion, what images make possible when it comes to a sense of justice or a sense of belonging or citizenship, correcting misrepresentation and things like that. So I hope you enjoy the evening. And again, I thank you for being here. So I want to just sort of start the discussion by introducing our guests. Myles Loftin is a 20-year-old freelance photographer and sophomore at Parsons School of Design. His work spans portraiture and fashion photography, often incorporating vibrant color schemes and various film stocks. Common themes covered within his work include the Black experience, identity, and representation of marginalized individuals. Myles recognizes the power that images hold in our society and seeks to use that power for positive change. He is shown in publications such as ID, The Fader, V Magazine, Aperture, as well as in several art spaces across the US. Art is an important part of his life, and as an artist of color, he works to inspire other artists of color to pursue successful careers in the creative industry. Kimberly Drew is the social media manager for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, creator of the Tumblr Black Contemporary Art, and the person behind Museum Mammy on Instagram and Twitter. Jamilla Okubo is a mixed media artist, illustrator, and surface pattern designer. Washington, D.C. based, Okubo earned her BFA in integrated design at Parsons School of Design. Her work has a consistent theme of exploring the intricacy of belonging to an American, Kenyan, and Trinidadian identity, and aims to use her interdisciplinary concentration as a medium to address topics within her culture. Rotating between collage, painting, fashion design, and printmaking, her work is heavily inspired by the art of storytelling through textiles and fashion. Peter Ashley is a freelance photographer based in NYC, all the way at the end there. Sorry. His clients include the New York Times, ID Magazine, and international editions of Vogue. Joshua Kissi is a Ghanaian-American photographer and creative entrepreneur based in New York City with over 10 years of experience. After co-founding creative agency, Street Etiquette, which contains a strong trait for storytelling, branding, and marketing through visuals on the web. He has had the pleasure of working with companies such as Apple, Adidas, GQ, and many other brands. Mr. Kissi has recently co-founded TONL, a culturally diverse photo stock which changes the narrative and aesthetic of the stock photography industry. Kissi became no stranger to the realization that the idea of representation in the digital landscape is still a creative challenge to pursue. Through his work on TONL, Kissi has been selected as Inc. Magazine's 30 Under 30 and Fast Company 100 Most Creative People. Please join me in welcoming our guest tonight. So, I would like to start more towards the beginning of your educational background and sort of educational background or creative background that led you to sort of the beginning work of what you're doing today. Myles, I'll start with you.
So like I went to, so for high school, I went to a science and tech school, which is kind of ironic because I ended up at an art school. But I was always interested in art, like I was always drawing and like kept sketchbooks and stuff. And my parents like recognized that. And so like, even though I didn't go to like art school or anything, I still had like experiences outside of school that like let me explore like my creative side. So like I went to like Art Explorers Camp. I did like pre-college at VCU. So that's kind of like my experience in terms of like education and like art.
And Kimberly.
Thank you so much, both of you, for putting this together. My education background, I've been in just about every type of school, if we're going to go back that far. So I've done public school and charter school and boarding school, super liberal women's college. I went to Smith College for my undergraduate degree. And throughout my education, I just really learned how to be adaptable and the power of being adaptable as opposed to assimilating. And when I got to Smith College, I actually was studying math. So for anybody out there who changes their major every 2 weeks, I was one of those people too. So I went from math to engineering. Engineering led me to architecture. I remembered that I hated drawing, but I like the idea of architecture as a medium because I think architects have the best quotes of all time. But I just didn't think that it was a strength of mine. And through study of architecture, I took my first art history class and had my aha moment. But I was really lucky to be at a school that had an open curriculum, so I had this opportunity in my first 2 years to be really curious. And throughout that entire journey, I was studying African American studies, so luckily I knew I would graduate with at least one degree. But my last 2 years of college were spent taking 3 art history classes a semester, and it sucked. It was awful. But it really did, that grind made me really invested and really adamant about finding success within art. Yeah. I joke sometimes that choosing an art history major and coming home and telling my parents that I was studying art history was harder than coming out as a queer person because my parents thought, they kind of saw me as this engineer person and thought I would be making all this money, and then immediately they're like, art what? And clearly it worked out. But for me, I'm definitely a person that had, even though I have this very one-to-one, I studied art history and African American studies, and now I support Black artists, there was a lot of R&D before I finally figured out where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
That's so dope. I don't know if okay. Similar to like Myles, I was always involved in the arts. Like my mom always had me going to like some art summer camp, or I was like trying to find my way into any and every art organization in DC. And then I went to like a regular high school and realized my junior year that I wanted to take art serious. So I transferred to Duke Ellington School of the Arts and studied visual arts. And that's what started my focus on just learning more about my identity and like appreciating my blackness, because the school was predominantly black, and I was like, whoa, like I fit in, I want to know more. So that was kind of like my leeway to just focusing on my identity, African art, textiles, and trying to figure out how I could study that all together at Parsons. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like you guys had great parents, because there was no art exploration in my house. But I always like to say, within starting Street Etiquette, I mean, like, the internet was kind of our classroom in that way, and social media was kind of our lecture room in a sense. So we just really did what we wanted to do. Me and Travis met in high school, and we created Street Etiquette when we were like 17, 18, which is like 10 years now, like 10 years ago, which is crazy. But yeah, I think I just had a penchant for like curiosity, storytelling, culture, street culture in New York City. I wish I would have went to art high school or art something.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that just made me that much more hungry within discovering like what creativity means to me personally, like not as a classroom, not as a body, but to me. So through the whole time, it's always been discovering that. Like I feel like the past 10 years has always just been about me being curious about creativity, storytelling, diversity, identity, all these different things. And sometimes I mean, YouTube just has like all the classes you would need low key. So I would just be on YouTube, just researching a lot, on Twitter, talking a lot, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah. And I'm like, I only did like maybe 2.5 semesters of college, some sort of college, before leaving. And I think my parents were really forward thinking and letting me take that risk to like discover what street etiquette could be outside of just like a fashion blog. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's great that you and Myles put this event on. Yeah.
Thank you.
I grew up in Toronto, and I actually went to university for psychology and human resource business, really boring stuff. And so one summer, I ended up at an internship in an HR department in Seoul. And I hated it and decided this wasn't for me. And it turned out one of my cousins was a still life photographer working in Korea. So I contacted him and I said, hey, listen, could I follow you to work for a month or so? And he was like, yeah, sure, come check it out. I did that and I was like, you take photos for a living? Like, this is what you get paid to do? Like, this is amazing. So he ended up giving me one of his cameras. And then I moved to New York, went back to school for photography, and here I am now, so yeah.
So as far as first opportunities, I think one thing that stood out, especially as being people of color, and it started with you, Myles, and what you were talking about, having parents who were relatively supportive of wanting to go into the arts. And I can speak probably for myself in saying that growing up, you know, there was this sort of obligation to go into a study that would lead to sort of a lucrative job or something that was stable and safe, because there was just too much at stake. Mm-hmm. So going into the arts wasn't always something that was nurtured. In many ways, I was considered sort of a black sheep in the family, just kind of, well, what do we do with this creative person, or this person wants to go into fashion? Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many people, when I started studying fashion, when I was in fashion studies here at Parsons, there would be young black women coming to me, emailing me, calling me. They admired what I was doing, and they would almost get there, you know, just put the application in, but then their parents would kind of talk them out of it, or they would talk themselves out of it because they just didn't know if they could take that risk of going into the arts, because what's out there, you know, what would this lead to? Mm-hmm. So I think one major thing that comes to mind with all of you, and why I'm so proud to have you all seated here and seeing how far you've all come, is just how courageous you are in kind of choosing these pathways that weren't always so clear. So now with your sort of educational background and how you got your start, when did the wheels start kind of turning? What were your first opportunities? How did this start kind of moving along for you? Who would like to jump in? What was your first opportunity where you realized, okay, maybe there's a career here, or maybe this could turn into something?
I think I'll speak on it. Like with Street Etiquette, maybe it was back in 2010. The first opportunity was actually with Urban Outfitters, sorry to say. But they emailed us and it was like, hey, like we want you guys to do what you do and just style. We'll interview and we'll pay you. And I was like, wait, getting paid? Like, seriously? Like, I was like, oh man, this is great. So we didn't know what to negotiate. This is a whole other side of the industry of like, what are you worth? Like, what's your fees? We didn't know what to negotiate. And I was just like, all I want is a MacBook, you know what I mean? So I just went on apple.com and the MacBook was like, $19.99 or whatever. So I was like, let's just do that times 2, just tell them. So we emailed them and like within 15 seconds, they're like, cool, great, awesome. Like, I was like, damn, this is too easy. But it made us realize like, oh, maybe we like short sold ourselves a little bit, that we asked for like $4,000 to do this like in-depth shoot and all this other stuff. But we were just so happy to just do it. So that was kind of a learning experience, and through trial and error, we got to the place where our fees made sense, especially being an agency. But during that time, like I was still like in sociology class, so like just having a new MacBook and a new camera just meant the world to me in that time. So that was pretty much my first start into seeing that, oh, you can actually make money off of this. And this is probably before Instagram. Like, I feel old, but like.
What platform did you start Street Etiquette?
Well, Street Etiquette was WordPress. So
WordPress.
So all of the people that actually interacted with us came to the website. It wasn't through social media or anything else. Then we went onto Tumblr, and that's where I started to follow like all of these amazing people. I'm sure I would have followed you too if I saw your profile. But no, so it was a community on Tumblr, but also had our own website. So yeah, that's how we kind of started out.
Yeah, I remember seeing Street Etiquette on Tumblr, and I remember like 2011, 2012, like you guys liked or reblogged one of my posts.
Yeah.
Like so excited. And now we're like here, so it's kind of weird.
It is.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to the point of making money on the thing, because it took me, Black contemporary art hasn't made a dime. Mm-hmm. Like, I just want to be very frank about that.
And by the way, again, this was on Tumblr.
This is on Tumblr, so I mean, Joshua and I, we go way back.
We go way back, Tumblr days.
Tumblr days, and before Instagram, I also think a lot about how different both of our careers would have been had we started on Instagram or in an Instagram age.
Yeah.
Because Tumblr was so one channel and there was such an intimate community, even that you have that that chemical response to being reposted. It doesn't work the same in Instagram like it did in Tumblr, and there was all these messages and stuff and whatever. There's, I don't know if you guys are Tumblr users, but there's a different way that community operates as opposed to the community on Instagram. But for a long time, I had not the same situation where there was no agency that was reaching out to me, or I would see the artists that I'd published and then I'd see their careers take off. And it took me a long time to really think about how, one, what generosity actually means as a publisher. Because what I wanted to do when I started my blog, which wasn't necessarily a chance, I got my first internship in arts at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And it was more than a chance. It was a total blowing off the top of what I thought I could be doing in the world, because as I said, I was kind of gone bowling around in college and didn't really know what to do. I was also super burnt out because I'm sure many of the young people of color in the audience have done tons of enrichment programs. I was going to school 6 days a week and shit, and then I got to college and was just exhausted. Yeah. And so by the time my sophomore summer came around and I found something that invigorated me again, that was when Black contemporary art started, because I had learned who Basquiat was that summer. I had learned who Trenton Doyle Hancock was that summer. I was working in Thelma Golden's office, and I wanted to find more art like that wasn't just in that museum. And I looked around for different blogs and couldn't find one, or didn't find one that I really liked, and so I started my own. But to the point of a big break moment, it wasn't until I figured out that, one, I had to come from behind the identity of the blog. And I think I would love to hear your thoughts on this too. coming from behind this Black contemporary art label where like there was no real authorship. Like no one knew who the fuck I was or who like the group of us were that were working on this thing. And then being able to sidestep and be like, okay, this is me as a person with feelings and thoughts and whatever. And for some reason that's very profitable, especially in this political environment, which is a whole nother conversation. But in terms of big break, to answer your direct question, it was more like experiences that totally rocked the core. And they weren't ones that made me a ton of money. Like I was making like $29,000 a year before taxes in my first job in the city. I don't know how I did it. I ate so much ramen. I ate so much ramen, but like it was being inspired so deeply by the work that it's like, yeah, you know, like I'm looking at my Metro card, like how much is this really worth? But when you know that you have a grander purpose in what you're doing, there's just like a different trigger that goes off in your brain. And not to say that the suffering is romantic, because it's not. But there is something in the gift of knowing how you want to do and what you want to do. Like all of us are relatively young. A lot of times people say, what is it like to be so young and so successful? It's like, the gift is that I was young when I figured out what I wanted to do. I look at someone like Sage Adams or Tyler Mitchell, where they're like young people who really have the gift of knowing kind of what they want to be doing. It's not so much about success, it's really just like a passion thing.
Right. I feel like for me, I feel like Tumblr kind of gave me the opportunity, because I started my Tumblr, I think, junior year of high school. I transitioned from Blogspot to Tumblr. And then I basically was like posting. I was just really excited to share like my work after I started going to Duke Ellington. I was like, oh my God, I just painted this acrylic painting. Let me just post it on Tumblr and see how people react to it. And then like over the years, closer to like getting accepted to Parsons, and starting to see people reblog my art even more, and like continuing to like be supportive of my journey of like, you know, being a freshman and trying all these new things, and like seeing how people reblogged like the art that was really popular. I was like, oh, I could sell this. And I found out about Society 6 somehow. So I started selling prints of like my artwork on there. I was like, oh, let me just put that on there, all of my illustrations, because I can use that money to buy more art supplies. I was like, how can I make some money off my work while I'm in school? So then I guess the more I put my work out there, which was like also kind of scary because people could just take it, you know?
Yeah.
Or also like Society 6, I've read a lot of people talking about like, you should get off of Society 6 and just start your own online shop. And I've been through so many experiences where it's like, I got off of Society 6 and then I had someone else sell my artwork on their online shop. And I didn't realize how to do that on my own until like recently. So I feel like, yeah, using Society 6 was like my first opportunity, just figuring out or learning about how I can make money off of my artwork. And then people started contacting me. And I still didn't really know the value of my artwork or how to price it. So I went through a lot of opportunity situations where I probably, like you said, like lowballed my prices. So yeah.
And I've seen that happen also, and with students, you know, or just imposter syndrome, or just not knowing your value and just trying to figure it out, undervaluing yourself.
It's so hard to figure it out because it's like, I feel like the creative world is one of those like industries where like you don't necessarily, like you don't know how to put a value on it exactly like in the beginning, and you're trying to like figure like, well, am I really worth $100 an hour? Like, is it really like that? And you kind of just have to like gain confidence in the fact that like your work is like worth time and it's worth money, and like other people are getting paid this much money, so why shouldn't I be able to?
Right.
But I think like for me, my first, not necessarily like big break, but like realization that like photography and like art could like lead to something bigger was when I was working as like a curator in Art Ho Collective when I was like a senior in high school. And that was just like really eye-opening for me, because like within the first few months of it even being a thing, like it was covered by like a bunch of different publications, like Dazed magazine and like a few other publications. And then we were like invited to Brooklyn to like work with Viceland, and I was like, this is like a whole
You hit the jackpot.
Yeah, I was like, what is like, this is like a whole new world that I didn't even like really know existed, because like I saw that stuff on Instagram and like Tumblr and stuff, but like to actually be experiencing it was like eye-opening for me, and it changed the way I thought about my work and like what was possible for my work.
Peter?
Yeah. Well,
How did you make that leap? And just kind of, from your educational background that you told us.
Yeah,
and,
I
like,
mean, my first year, I went to SVA for photography for my undergrad. And I remember during my first year, I was constantly worried about how am I going to make a living doing what I love. And so I put up posters around the city offering headshots for $100. And I would shoot for free newspapers that you could grab, you know the ones that are in the plastic things. I'd contact them and be like, hey, like I'm a student, I really love photography, can I shoot something for you? And they'd send me to shoot like candy shops that are opening or something, just silly shit that like I didn't want to do, but I was excited to still be doing what I was doing. And I remember halfway through first year, I had a black and white printing teacher who turned to me and said, or turned to everyone actually, and he was like, listen, if you want to make it in this photo thing, you better be rich or crazy. And I went, oh no, I'm neither of those. What am I going to do? And I kept doing these small magazines and trying to climb my way up, and I kind of got frustrated and just thought, how, like, and I was obsessed with tactile experience of magazines and printed matter. So I had a friend who I met who was doing journalism at Columbia, doing his master's. And we'd spend our time every weekend just going to Barnes & Noble, just flipping through magazines and being like, oh, I really love this, and I love the paper, I love the layout. And so we decided to just start our own magazine. We didn't know what we were doing. We just loved magazines, and we figured it out. And it was kind of an organic thing, and we learned on our own.
That's the best.
And that's what started Corduroy, yeah. And we kind of created our own opportunity because people weren't booking me for the shoots I wanted to do and the people I wanted to shoot. So I kind of thought, well, I'll just make my own thing. And I think that was kind of the start of my career, I'd say, yeah.
And so that's like some of the best things, just to sort of insert myself for a moment, that got me thinking about the kind of aha moment I had last summer. After teaching for 4 years, I have a friend and colleague by the name of Jonathan Square who also operates online through this account called Fashioning the Self in Slavery and Freedom. And so he's a historian, currently teaching at Harvard, and he had this interest in race, identity, clothing, and the dynamics of power. And I had similar interests. And we were wanting to engage the public in these conversations about race and fashion, how dress can sort of be a tool of self-determination. And so we just kind of thought, why are we asking for permission or for space for these things, to have these discussions? Let's just put on our own workshop. And we did just that. Last July, we put on a workshop called Fashion and Justice. And that's Jonathan up there. And it sold out. And it was this great opportunity where we had fashion designers, heads of nonprofit organizations, models, people in the food industry. Everyone kind of turned out for this, students, wanting to hear what we had to say and learn something new. And one of the designers who had registered for our workshop that summer was Becca McCarran from Chromat, who said, this was such an enlightening experience. Let's get together and put a talk on this September, right in the middle of Fashion Week, where we're kind of holding the fashion industry accountable for issues that we find problematic when it comes to representation and diversity and power. And so it just sort of snowballed from there, just through an idea that Jonathan and I had. And then we had someone reach out to us from Austin. So in February, we traveled out to Austin and put on Fashion and Justice workshop number 2, and now we're planning to take it to Harvard and other places. We're doing one at the Fluid Project. So it's morphed from conversations about race to conversations next month that we're gonna have about gender fluidity and queer identity. And just using the same framework, but creating a platform for more voices. So I completely relate with what you're saying, and just sort of deciding to just kind of carve out your own space, create something on your own, don't wait for permission, And Kimberly, you were just sort of, just like this blog was just sort of something to help educate yourself.
Yeah.
And then you found out that so many other people found it to be valuable, a valuable resource.
Yeah, I wanted to add too, well, one, I think that there's something really important to be said around, like, you don't have to be a millionaire to follow your idea.
Right.
I think it's really important to be resourceful, to be able to pull off certain things, and of course, operating within institutions, as some of you guys are students, thinking about, taking initiative in the way that Myles has, like, I know this wasn't easy to pull off, but there is the opportunity that you have while you're in school or in relationship to these types of institutions to do some of the legwork.
Right.
But I also think for me specifically in my blog, as I look back on my career, though short, I think a lot about how tenacious I was when I was your age, where I knew I needed to learn more, and I didn't think about all the things I couldn't do. I just started publishing on the blog. I knew what I didn't know. I knew 25 artists, and I knew I needed to know more of them. I reached out to some friends to also co-edit the blog, because it's never just been me. And so I could continue to learn from what other people were looking at as well. But when I look back, I don't think about, all the ways in which the art world is white, or the art world is this, or the art world is that. I was just operating 100% from the things I wanted to see. When we got 100 followers, one of my friends who actually used to work here at the New School, Kendra Danowski, Kendra like very vividly remembers me like going up to her like super stoked on 100, which like in today's social economy is like nothing. But it really was operating from the space of like, this is the thing I want to see, and you can't think about all the ways you can't do something. It's like, especially as people, especially in New York, like we're just over-resourced in general. It's like, don't be your first no. Like, don't be the person who's like, no, I can't do this, or no, I can't blah, blah, blah. It's like, you have to find a scalable way within what capacity you have to do the thing, whether that starts as just journaling about how badly you want to do this thing, like figure out, what the dreamscape is for the project that you're working on. That doesn't cost a dime.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you'll figure out a way or pathway towards the thing that you want. But I think that there's a lot of times, especially as people of color or marginalized people in general, that all we think about is what we can't do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went on a Twitter rant about this, about how like it's so easy for you to like convince yourself that you can't do something, and like there's a lot of power in like your own thought and like with like things that you say. Like you can easily say like, oh, I can't do this, and then like that the idea is gone and stuff. But if you actually like say like, oh, I can actually like go and create my own blog and like create my own platform, or like create my own course, like you can actually like speak those things into existence.
Absolutely. And as we wind down the conversation that I'm kind of leading with you all, I want to touch on kind of the core work that you're doing right now and what representation means to you with that, and what your kind of respective roles right now have made possible in terms of representation and diversity, power. So I guess I'll start with you, Myles. The Hooded Project, how did that come about, and kind of how does it, what significance does it have for you right now with kind of what you're doing creatively?
Yeah, so this project, it was something that I had like written down in a journal of mine. Like sometimes when I have like ideas that randomly come into my mind, I'll like write them down. And my professor, Gigi Polo, for my time class, it was like first semester, freshman year, she was like, for your final, you can do whatever you want. And so like, I'm a procrastinist. And so like, I hadn't started on the project yet. I was like, okay, so this is like a good opportunity for me to like finish this project that I wanted to do. And so I did it. And the project Hooded, it focused on how the media's negative representations of Black men contribute to how people see us in society and how people treat us in society. Mm-hmm. And so like, I never expected for it to like turn into what it has. Like I put it on Twitter, and I put it on like, I think I published it through milk.xyz, and then from there it kind of like expanded into something like greater than myself. Like people were writing about it and stuff. I got the opportunity to speak about it at Dutch Design Week in the Netherlands. I got to speak about it at Yale, which was like, I never even imagined that like my work could even like reach into those spaces.
Yep.
Like, my dad made me apply to Princeton when I was going to like colleges and I got rejected. So it's just like to be at Yale was like crazy to imagine. And just like having people email me was like one of the coolest things. Like people like Black mothers who were like, thank you for like creating this type of imagery because like this is what I want like my sons to look at. Was also like really cool. Like I participated in this project called Art in Ad Spaces, and they focused on like replacing commercial material with like art. And one of the pictures that they took of mine, which they like replaced a bus sign with like that photo. And it's like,
so from Hooded, it's the third image here.
The third image, and it's like a little Black boy with his mom, and they're like looking at the image, and I just thought that like that was just so cool, because it's like that's kind of the effect that I wanted to have with it. But yeah, and it just ties into like my work in general in the sense that like since being here, I've recognized like the power of images and how image makers kind of have a privilege in a sense of like deciding who's represented. And so I realized that like I could use that privilege to like represent people who aren't normally represented, or like if they are represented, it's usually in like a bad way. So yeah.
Absolutely. Your image was so powerful. I was asked to speak at Ryerson University to their fashion department last month about fashion as a tool to fight racism. And I asked Myles if I could use images from Hooded, and so they used it for the posters there at Ryerson University. So the images are definitely spreading, and the message that goes with it. And so Kimberly, with your work, if you could share with the audience what you do and how that's kind of created this platform or a springboard into sort of collaborations and just sort of broadening your influence and visibility as Museum Mammy.
Yeah, it's funny because for the work that I do, and recently I spoke at Harvard, and that's ridiculous, but not. So I was talking to the students, and one of the young women in the class asked me what it was like to be such a powerful person in the arts, and I'm not. Like, that was the thing that kind of came out of that conversation, because I have a ton of influence, but I'm not a person who can say infrastructurally, this is what we're going to be doing. But I have a really keen understanding on if I do things in a certain way, then I can be an inspiration arm or a tool to people. Thinking about, especially like in the last year, I've become so much more aware of how I can make things more accessible on a really much more macro scale than I'd been thinking about it. And so that for me has been one of the most powerful things in terms of representation, is what kind of indelible mark can we all have responsibility in leaving on our industries? Because it really is, I think, all of us as people who have in one way or another made our own thing. It's actually legacy building, and should be spoken about that way, which is bigger than institutions, right? It's bigger than the rules of engagement. It's really about how you do your thing in these spaces. It's when you go to bed at night, like what are the things that keep you up? Or we were talking backstage about how we tackle racism within our respective industries, and how we what are our strategies for resolving conflict, yada yada yada. And so for me, in terms of representing or being a person who's representational of many different identities, I just think about I critically think about what the legacy is and how that impact has to continue to evolve and grow as my beacon gets bigger and bigger.
And being at the Met as a social media manager, I mean, that's a lot of power. And being a woman of color there, and dealing with images, what people see, messages that are, what is communicated. And aside from that, just your Instagram account, you have over 100,000 followers. So, I'm just curious how images, and now at this point with over 100, maybe 130,000 followers, what representation or image means to you. Do you feel an increased pressure of what you kind of share with your audience, this kind of captive audience and this following, many of them have followed you since Black Contemporary Art and Tumblr? Do you think about that, of just kind of like the images that you post?
Yeah, it happens on two different planes. So with work stuff, there is a power of curator that I have over the images that are shared, and then generally what some of the images or messages are that go out through the Met's channels, but there are a lot of debts that I have to pay too. So it's to the exhibitions that are on, to the works that are on. A lot of the words that are going on aren't necessarily my scholarship, and so it's a wayfinding, which is very important and has its own set of power. And then on my personal accounts, a lot of what really was my imprint in the beginning was the impossibility of me being in these spaces, which I've kind of changed my framework on. But I felt like as I went from being an art history major to into the workforce almost immediately, working at Creative Time, from Creative Time to working at Hyperallergic, to working at the Studio Museum again, to working at in the Commercial Art Gallery, I wanted to bring people along on that journey because I don't come from a lot of wealth. I didn't know how to read until I was like 8. There were so many things about the way that my success happened that like, you just wouldn't look at me like 10 years ago and think like, this is gonna be this bitch who just sold a book. You know, like that's just not.
And you have a book coming out.
And I have a book coming out. And so there's just these ways in which like, I was always told as a person who like had potential, but like didn't reach it. Like I failed classes, you know, like I wasn't a perfect student. And so for me, I try to show the brilliance of what can happen when you find like your thing.
Yeah.
And so if there's a particular responsibility, it's just that like, this is what happens when someone's really passionate about something.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that thing. You don't have to love art. You don't have to follow me because you like art. It's like, if you can just read from this thing that I really love what I'm doing, and that inspires you in some way to like follow that thing that you really love too, that's my goal, especially in the digital space.
Beautiful, thank you.
Wait, can I?
Yes. And Jamilla, your work and what you're doing, here at Parsons, where you started thinking about kind of identity and the images that you were going to illustrate, and when it came to representation, was your perspective that critical at that point, or did you always kind of have a clear vision?
I feel like it started when I transferred to Duke Ellington. Like I said, being around like a predominantly Black student base, and then also having like, at least for my art courses, I had all Black professors or teachers who was teaching me art. Like I had an art history teacher who's a contemporary artist now, Stanley Squirewell. He was my art history teacher, and he would like put on these Art 21 DVDs showing me artworks by like Mickalene Thomas, Hank Willis Thomas, you know, Kara Walker. And I was just like in awe, because I was like, what? There are Black contemporary artists like just doing this work and already well known, you know. So that really inspired me. And then like my teachers were very like, you know, pro-Black and just like, you know, embrace who you are, embrace your Blackness, you know. Our school was very centered around that. And so that made me start wondering more about where I come from, being like African American and Kenyan and Trinidadian. Like my dad's half Kenyan, Trinidadian. So like I grew up being raised by my mom, and my mom is from the South, or like my family on her side. So I was like, okay, like I really want to know more about Kenya. Like how can I explore that through art? So that was like my way of just like exploring my identity. Then I was like, okay, I want to go to Parsons for fine arts, and I want to be like the other Black contemporary artists that I saw, and like be in museums and things like that. Then freshman year, I was like, ooh, I want to do fashion, I think, and textiles, and like make 3D objects. So then I was kind of like exploring still those topics through fashion, through textiles, and it just somehow still came back to like my identity. Like I used Conga fabrics, which is really popular in East Africa, to like kind of talk about who I am or where I come from, and trying to mix all of my identities within that like platform. So it's like I would think about sayings that were like Southern, inspired by my grandmother, like the stories that she would always tell me, and then put them into my patterns, but like in the structure of a like Kenyan or Tanzanian Conga fabric with the border and the saying. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, well, and so then this last image we have here, so this is all of your beautiful work. This last image here, how did the Dior Opportunity come about, where you and several artists were selected to create sort of like the pattern work for these Lady Dior bags?
through social media, thank you, I was like really confused. I shouldn't say this, but I really was just like skeptical. I was like, who are you? Because like it wasn't specifically Dior, it was a like an art consulting group that works with them that handles these projects for them. So they reached out to me and they were like, hey, we just did this project last year and we wanted to know if you were interested in being a part of it this year. They were like trying to diversify their group of artists. Because last year it was like a group of like well-known, to my knowledge, like white contemporary male artists. Like I didn't see any female artists or anything. So I was like, this is different, okay. And I was like, so how did you guys find me? And they're like, yeah, we just Googled. And I'm like, what did you Google? Like, so I think the way the person I spoke with described it was like more like, they didn't say ethnic, but they said like diversity. Yeah, diverse group of artists. So yeah, they found me through social media, which is mainly how people have found me and contacted me about like work. And it's really interesting because it's always, so far my clients have been European. Like it'll be someone from like France or Italy or Amsterdam or Sweden. And I'm like, okay, I wonder what the connection is, like why they're drawn to my work. And I have had like a few like Black clients, which makes me really excited because that's like my dream goal is to like work with Black clients and like just build with people of color. Like that's like my end goal with my work. But yeah, that's how they found me.
Great.
Social media.
And Joshua,
Yes.
with
So
the latest work, I really want to touch on, especially for the topic of our discussion tonight with TONL and what this means and makes possible for images. Even if, also if you want to speak about street etiquette of what it made possible, sort of like what you and I were talking about backstage, what street etiquette meant for you, and then this transition that you made into creating TONL and what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Street Etiquette started as a men's fashion blog, evolved to a creative agency. We still work with Adidas, even though I'm wearing Nikes right now, don't judge me. I think TONL was just birthed from feeling like very helpless and frustrated during moments where, Black unarmed men were murdered. You saw that image all over your social media platforms, on television, and it just really made me think about how important imagery is when it comes to telling the full story. TONL was born from that, and I think it was just really about taking back the narrative. But I didn't want to create something else that was just like a street etiquette, in a sense, where I was like, okay, like, I thought about commerce, but I also thought about culture and community and a sense of belonging. And TONL was pretty much all of those things coming into interaction with each other. So TONL is basically a culturally diverse photo stock company. And one of our first projects, honestly, was with the UIHI, which is a Native American and Alaskan Indian agency out in Seattle. And here we're thinking that Black people have been underrepresented, Asian, Latino, and a Native American organization is literally the first email we get talking about, hey, all we have is images of people on a reservation.
Yeah.
All we have is images of people that look sick or aren't doing well. So can we partner up, to create images of Native American lawyers, Native American doctors, Native American people just enjoying a slice of pizza. The simplest things weren't present. So these are some of the opportunities that has been afforded to TONL that with street etiquette, it was really much more so in the fashion lifestyle sector. And I loved it, and I love what you did with your program on how to attack issues of diversity within fashion. But as soon as I launched TONL, I was in diversity and inclusion market now, from fashion to D&I and equality.
Yep.
And I really had to educate myself on what it even means to be those things and my specific voice. But being a photographer, I'm like, man, I've been on this earth for 28 years and I've been a Black man. Diversity and inclusion has been my everyday experience.
Yeah.
This is not anything new. This is not anything that, it's new for certain industries because they're getting open more to the idea of what that means in a corporate world. But in my head, street etiquette stems from, civil rights movement. It stems from Black Lives Matter. It stems, all those different facets of existing. Literally, we just tackled that through clothing and fashion, but now I'm doing that through stock photography, which has been like the most, mundane, like
Right.
old industry in the world. And, you have the Gettys and the Shutterstocks, but again, if you don't see yourself, you almost feel like you don't exist. And I don't think people truly know what that feels like until they see a Black Panther. But literally, Black Panther is literally a fraction of the product that could happen of when you see yourself. Like, that's gonna have a wavering effect of people just creating, whether you're Asian or Southeast Asian or Latino, like literally be like, what would this story look like from my perspective?
Yeah.
And whatever your otherness, like that's always an opportunity to tell a story and have somebody else feel like they're also a part of the story. So for me, that's just been what I've been working on with TONL. And I mean, we've had the opportunity of just really, like all of our models and subjects have been people that emailed us. Like it hasn't been like any casting calls, anything like that. Even this girl who goes to Yale is one of our first albino models, and she was like, hey, I want to be the first albino person on TONL. Like I want to represent who I am, knowing that there's other people that have albinism all around the world and felt like how I felt growing up. So like it's just been a really, really amazing process to go through, from taking photography for clients and like doing that with Streetica in a creative agency realm to go into like impactful work and working with people and changing their lives as you're going with it, because it's not just about one person, it's like the story that one person represents. So even if, same-sex couples, like people think diversity is just like a racial minority thing, but it's like, no, there's people with disabilities,
Yeah.
there's so much, and even within that, like all the stock photography, like 90% of the stock photography you see with disabled people are actors. Like that's very insulting and disrespectful to the people that should be living those stories. So the people we feature on our site that have disabilities are actually people that are living that life, and we do something called narratives where we interview them, we let them tell their story, and a lot of times it's just the lack of that kind of created this whole issue that we're trying to like kind of combat from different areas. Like there's not just, from a fashion perspective or from a music perspective, from an art perspective, like literally everybody has to just kind of stand up and see like what their perspective and gift is and how to tackle it. And that's like the best part about it. It's like, we're at very exciting times right now.
Wow.
And I'm like super excited to just be a part of the conversation.
And it's so powerful what you're doing, and all you need to do is create that platform, and you have all of these people just coming out to you and just saying,
No,
I just want to see an image of just someone eating a slice of pizza, who,
Yeah, like like you can't find images of a Native American person eating pizza. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
To me, that's crazy in 2018. You know what I mean? And to be able to provide a platform that does that has just been like a beautiful process, because you're giving life to people.
Yeah.
Literally giving life to people, and that's like, to me, that's like purpose over anything else. So to be able to do that is just like a pleasure, really, really.
Fantastic. Peter, just wanted to talk about your work before we go to Q&A. So kind of your ambitions of what you're wanting to do and sort of your experiences being in the fashion industry with commercial imagery. I know you and I were speaking backstage about some of the kind of disappointing moments you've had on shoots and how that kind of led to what you want to do now in the fashion industry?
Yeah, I think if I'm being honest, this issue of representation and diversity is something fairly new for me that I've been discovering, I think through just personal racist experiences that I've encountered, or just working in the fashion industry. And, I think I started off doing portraiture, and I was being commissioned by magazines to shoot portraits. So I don't really get a say in who I shoot. I just get booked and I go shoot them. And so a couple years ago, I transitioned over into fashion because I thought I would have more freedom to shoot who I shoot and such. But, it's still the case that often for a fashion story, I could have a Black model or an Asian model only if there's a couple white models already in the story, if there's a group story. Or, for example, recently, there was a story and I wanted to shoot this Jamaican model. And they said, okay, well, can we find a white girl that we could shoot with her? And I said, well, why? Why can't we just shoot a single girl story? So it's this kind of perpetuation of lack of representation. And I think it's going to slowly change, but like many of you in this room, I grew up not seeing myself in media. Not just magazines, but TV shows, movies. If, I saw an Asian male represented, they played a nerd or a geek or, and I think that's still the case. We're still this, I don't know, like the joke at the, the guy with the funny accent who makes people laugh on a sitcom, And I think it's important not just the way we see ourselves, but also how other people see and understand us as well. And so I think media is really powerful in that way, and I've been thinking a lot about that. And I guess I read this, Jamil Smith did this amazing article about Black Panther in Time magazine. That was the cover article, and he spoke on multiplicity of roles, and kind of like what you're saying about the eating pizza, it can't just be, we have to see ourselves and possibilities of seeing ourselves as lawyers, doctors, janitors, like all types of images. And I think that shapes the way people see us in the world. And I think, I'm trying to push for that diversity. And recently I read that, on American fashion magazines, only 22% in 2017 were women of color, and less than 1% were Asian women. So I'm trying to understand how to change that, and I think at the moment I'm working on possibly launching like a media group, and that might come through the form of a magazine or a podcast, but trying to find a platform, and coming back to what we were talking about, if you don't see something out there, like create it yourself and see how you could change that. And I think for myself, it's just, I think similar to the Black community, when for years, if you look at a beauty magazine, you look at how to do your hair or makeup, and it was specifically to white people. So in the same way, I think the Asian community, when I grew up, I never saw a single magazine with an Asian male on the cover, or knew how to do my hairstyle, or, you know what I mean? So I think it's really important for us to create something new, and I think that's something I'm hoping to work on in the next couple of years. So
Excellent.
I don't know, we'll see.
Yes. Yeah.
Forward to it.
I just wanted to add one thing though on the Black Panther comment, because it's like, there was I'm forgetting his name now, but there's a photo editor who works at ESPN, and he did this amazing Twitter thread about all of the covers, because there were like 20 covers and none of them were shot by Black photographers.
Oh, of like
That's
Black.
great.
Like even Essence.
Yeah.
It was like, what? Like, what? That's ours. So there is something to be said too for diversity on both sides of the lens, right?
Right.
And it makes us making our own things all the more important.
And I also think it's having people of color in positions of power who are doing the bookings too. Photo editors, art directors, editor-in-chief, and I think only then these things will change, and yeah.
Excellent. We went a little bit over 30 minutes, but you can never kind of neatly tie up these conversations like this. So now I'm just checking our Google form. Don't have any questions submitted via our Google form. So we'll just do it the old-fashioned way, and just reaching out to you and passing a mic around. We've got a mic here and here.
And if anyone can't come to the mic, we can bring it out to them.
Absolutely, thank you. So
I see a hand.
There's a question back
we've
there.
got one question here, and then
Hi. So I'm Whitney, and I just wanted to ask, how do you find courage? Because I think it's really important to have that. As Black people, you're always not encouraged to go into arts, and so you need to give yourself that courage. So what are the ways you've told yourself you can do it? What are the words? What have you always done to encourage yourself? Because like you said, we need to be in those positions of power. But if we have that inspiration to be a creative director, but we're telling ourselves we can't, it's are we going to wait for someone else to get into that position to do it? So I think it's important, how have you encouraged yourself or, giving yourself that courage to do things?
I mean, I think I put creative director in my bio just because I can, It's like everybody else. I just woke up one morning and was like, I'm a creative director. No, but I think, I mean, having mentorship is very important, and I started to look for that within the last 2 years. But before that, like, it was just all trial and error. But just knowing that the possibility of what you want doesn't exist, that alone just encourages me. Like, that alone is like a daily thing that I could digest and be like, wow, this is why I'm doing it. I mean, one part of it is I love to do it. The other part of it is that somebody else may love to do it if they see somebody else like me in that position. And that alone just like fills my heart with joy, just be able to create and be encouraged there.
Yeah, I agree. I think also courage isn't something that you have to seek externally. It's like you want to do the thing. You know, it's like there's some things that I think we all hunger for, even if it's not really specific. But I think that listening to that is really important. And then the next action on that is building community around that, whether that's someone who is a mentor figure, that's such hard work. Even at like our stage in careers, it's like, it's really hard. Like it's really, really hard to find the right person. But what is easier is building a community of people around you is like, whatever friend is like, you're feeling yourself, like get rid of them. Like I can't say enough, like people, like anybody who's like, you post too many selfies, they're not your friend.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with you in saying like, having like people on your side to like support you is like one of the best ways to like build that courage and like, to feel like what you're doing is like possible. Just like having people who kind of have like the same goals and dreams as you. Because it's like when you're down, they can pick you up, and then when they're down, you can help them up. So it's kind of like a balancing act in that way.
And to pick up off of what Myles said, like if you don't have mentors or if you don't have those group of friends who just aren't with the program, but you are like in a city or an area where you can't connect to people that you know would get you. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're, I don't know, like from a small town, or you don't even have to be from a small town. You just really have to like find that world that you get all of your source of inspiration from and just lock yourself in sometimes and just really just dive in, you know, get yourself in the zone. Like, don't think about what people are saying. If your mom is like, oh, what are you doing? Like, you don't do anything, you know, it's like, okay, Mom, I love you, but
She's probably right.
I'm gonna, true, but like, you know, if you're really trying to like focus on your vision of like becoming an artist, like, you really, it's not easy to say that, but like, you really do just have to like, grab yourself and just go for it. Like the worst, you know, my friend in the audience, Sige, always tells me the worst someone can say is no. Like if you don't try, how do you like not know that you won't make it, or that one person will give you that opportunity to show what you got, you know? You just gotta do you.
Yeah, even if it's coming from your parents, because that's a pretty strong thing to deal with day to day.
Yeah.
I don't know, especially for like immigrant parents, they feel like since they came here, like your whole life is owed to them, like, which is not true. I'm like, I never signed that contract, never like, but I think my parents, they didn't even understand what I did, and I couldn't blame them. Like I literally try to walk them through things and just be like, okay, this is what it means. Okay, you know, GQ and New York Times, and after that happens, they just want to brag to their friends, but for the most part, like they begin to understand because there's more and more people doing it, and they develop the lexicon to do so. So it just takes a little bit of time, even if like that resentment is coming from your parents, where it's like, no, you should be a lawyer, doctor, engineer. I know you're Nigerian, and we're all about that, the African community. So no, yeah, just got to encourage yourself for sure.
I think it's just baby steps, and I think for myself, I don't know that I ever had that much courage per se, but I think I just put in the work. And, you know, I think it's really easy to get impatient because you have this lofty goal of where you want to get and you're not there yet, and it's really frustrating because you see that huge gap. But I think it's just one step in front of the other, and I think it's kind of crazy when I think back that I was putting these like $99 headshot things around the city, and you know, I think you just have to be hungry and you have to want it, and you just keep pushing forward regardless of what people say, and just put in the work. And I think if you work harder than everyone else and you want it more than anyone else, I think you'll get to where you want to be going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've got a question.
Hi, my name is Laquan Dawson. I'm a photographer as well.
And right now, a big thing for me that's been important and very vital to like any success that I've had so far is collaboration. And so like I'm reaching out to a lot of places and a lot of people, and then in return, people are reaching out to me and you know, wanting to collaborate, and I feel very pressured to be like yes to every single thing. And then I get stuck doing every single thing, and not every single thing I want to do. Sometimes all of them I want to do, or I want to be able to do all of them. But like, so when have you guys, I don't know, decided like I can't take on that much, or I actually don't want to say yes to this, or I don't know. Can you guys speak to that? I guess, like getting to a point where you're like, okay, I'm good now. I don't have to do every single thing that people want me to be a part of.
Sort of like when to say no.
Right. Or when you don't feel like you have to say yes.
Yeah.
Because like, when you're like young, up and coming, or, you're just getting started and it's like a good amount of momentum, you're like, okay, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, and this is going to get me here. And you just like, when did you get to a point where you're like, okay, I can relax now? Like, that would be cool to do, but like, I actually don't need to do that to keep thriving in my career.
Like, how do you prioritize these things? And then,
Right.
and is there even a time when you can relax?
Yeah, I like experienced something like that sort of in terms of like, because like when you start photography and stuff, like a lot of the first things that you do is like free, and like in the industry, a lot of companies and brands and stuff are like trying to take advantage of young artists and like just use them and like say, oh, like we'll pay you in exposure, or like not giving like money and stuff. And it's like cool after a while, but at some point I kind of had to realize that like I need to like value myself more, but also just like I had my fill of like free work, and I was like, I need to start getting paid for this. And I feel like it's kind of something that you just like feel internally. I feel like at some point I was just like, this is getting to be too much, and like I can't continue to be taken advantage of in these like certain spaces. But I feel like in terms of what you were talking about with like collaboration and stuff, I think just like really being specific and intentional in like what you put your time to, because like your time is really valuable. And so like I think that will help you kind of determine like when you need to pull back or like push forward in terms of like projects like that.
I think for photography, I had a rule that I made for myself after a while, because I know how it's hard to say no because you think it might be a good opportunity or not. So I kind of created these three kind of sections in my mind. Is one, does it pay? Is this going to pay my bills? Two, is this something I'm excited about? And third one is this something that is going to help me with credentials? Like, is it a cool publication or a name that I could use? And so out of those three things, I decided to only start saying yes if it met two of the three factors. And if it was all three, then it's like, you're good. But if it's just one, then, I think twice about it. The only one that I'd maybe do that if it met one of the criteria was the one that paid, because you got to pay your bills. But like, if it was just, I think that's a pretty good rule that worked out for me. But, I think when you're starting out, I also think it's important to just be patient and just work through a lot of stuff, you got to put in your hours. And so I remember when I was starting out and I wanted to do fashion, I couldn't find the stylist I wanted to work with, or I couldn't find the models I wanted to do, but I still needed to keep making work. So I'd go to H&M and like put everything on a credit card, shoot it, and then return it all. You know what I mean? Like, you got to kind of figure out how to make it work for you. But I think at the beginning, you just work hard and put in your time, and then later on, then you could start being more discerning. And then later on down the line, I think the power of no is really strong. It is. And I think that's something I'm only recently starting to learn, is that I think, kind of like what Myles was saying, you need to really value yourself. And I've had so many incidences where I should have said no, because certain clients, if I said no a couple times, then they come back to you with something better and bigger, or with more money. You know what I mean? And I think that's really powerful as well, because psychologically, like, you know, if you turn them down, people want to work with you more. So I don't know. I mean, it's kind of worked out that way for me, but yeah.
Yeah, what you said about the 3 things that you use to decipher, like, if you really should take that, those are really great. Like, I'm still learning how to say no, or like really just remind myself, like, you are valuable, like that's why they're coming to you in the first place, you know? And then also, if you're considering saying no, think about like how you would feel if you said yes. Like the after product of, you know, starting to work on this project where you know you're not getting that much paid, or you're only getting paid exposure. Are you really gonna feel good after that? Like, sure, you have it, you know, in your portfolio, and everyone else might be like, oh my God, that's so awesome, you did so great, but deep down inside you're like, yeah, but I really want to tell y'all, like, I didn't get paid shit, and it makes me feel so angry, and like, you know, you want to like expose the people, like you don't want to get into that kind of situation where you're like battling between the two. So it's like, just take your time. Also, for me, what's helped me, which I do often, because I still, like, I don't take collaborating with Dior to the head, because like people who may not have the budget, like Dior still, you know, obviously want to collaborate with me, and I'm not going to be like, oh, if you don't have that budget, I can't work with you. No, I want to work with everyone. So it's like, I still ask my friends, like, oh, what do you guys think? Like, this is what they're offering. Do you think this is reasonable? Like, will I benefit from this? Are they valuing my work? Like, or are they trying to take me for granted just because I'm, you know, young, and they know, because I'm young and I'm also a Black woman, because people have tried to pull the cis card on me, who are like also Black, and like, sis, like, I can do this for you, and like, you know, help each other out. And I'm like, but I need to pay my bills, and I'm trying to move forward also. Like, I want to help you while you help me, but like, you know, have some sort of exchange besides exposure. It's hard to say no, but like, yeah, those 3 factors, and like, you know, telling your friends about it, I think that really helps. So.
We have another question.
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
My name's Carly. I'm a senior fashion design student at Parsons, and I have a question about social media, because that's been a big part of the conversation tonight, and it's changed our daily lives throughout the years. And most of us have grown up with, like, you know, knowing how to use a computer, or like being taught how to use a computer, and have seen the acceleration of like technology within our lifetime. So I wanted to just get y'all's thoughts about any challenges that you face with using social media as a tool, as a creative, as an artist, and if you think that having a presence on all of these different platforms and kind of like branding yourself in a way is necessary, like for younger artists who are like just starting out, if doing that is something that they need right now in order to achieve success and in order to be visible. And also, like, if there's any situations that you've had where you've kind of like manipulated those challenges, or taken advantage of those challenges to work in your favor, because you might just be aware of the cons of social media. So yeah.
I think a lot of it, hey girl. I think a lot of it has to do with what your goals are. So if you want to work in media, you have to be on media, right? But if you want to work in more of like a design capacity, like I've seen tons of websites of art directors or creative directors where it's just like a landing page, and then it's word of mouth. But then that requires a lot more legwork, where then you have like your PDF that you then send. And so it's really a strategy thing. There's some people who are very work in progress on their channels. There are some people who, because their goal is to like illustrate their process, but it really is figuring out what you want your end goal to be. So if you want whatever you're making to end up on Dazed, for example, or something, it's like you have to make yourself accessible to Dazed, right? And that comes with a level of risk associated with it, but there's no risk like them not knowing that you exist. Or that's my opinion. I think artists have a different opinion on it, but for me as a media maker, it's just like you closed mouths don't get fed.
I agree with that. Like a lot of my friends ask me like, there's like when to start their Instagram or like start sharing their work, and like I thought about it. Like if you guys go on my Tumblr, like I said, I've had it since high school. I have processed photos of like when I was in class in the 3D studio making head masks out of wood and like plexiglass. So you can see pretty much like how I have evolved as an artist. But like Kimberly said, it depends on how you're trying to, like what your motive is with when you are branding yourself. I lost my train of thought, but yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely like seen a lot of the benefits of social media. Like a majority of the work and like opportunities that I've gotten have been through social media. So like I'm thankful for it in that regard. But like with anything, there's like the pros and the cons of it. And like with Instagram, when you're kind of like branding this like personality or like this brand that you are, people kind of like, they have like an expectation of something and they're like constantly expecting new things. And like I found myself getting like caught up in that and like caught up in trying to like post new photos like every week. And I was just like, at some point, I was just like, this is not working for me. Like this is
Like
not.
it felt a little inauthentic after a while?
Yeah, it felt inauthentic, and it also feels like I can't make
Rushed work.
I can't make rushed work, and I can't make work that is going to be like sustainable if I'm just like cranking it out every single week. Like I feel like work that is put out like that, it's like here one day and gone the next. Like people see it and then they forget about it. And like people will unfollow. Like I remember I took like a break from Instagram, like posting on Instagram. Like I was still looking on it, of course, but like posting on Instagram for like 4 weeks. And I lost like 100 followers. And I was just like, why do y'all expect so much content so constantly? Like, what is the issue? And then like another thing with social media that creatives really have to like be aware of is just like the constant comparison to other people. Cause like, you'll just like, I'll find myself scrolling down my page for like an hour, just like looking at other people's work and like where they are in their careers and like looking at their stories and seeing what they're doing. And then you start to like think about it in context of like what you're doing. And then you're like, why am I not like doing these things and like shooting with these publications and stuff? And it's just like, it's really hard, like not comparing yourself, but like you kind of just have to like put blinders on and just like focus on like what you're doing. Cause like, my trajectory is not the same as someone else's, and like really realizing that, and it's like it takes a lot because like I still compare myself to people all the time.
And that's so important that you bring that up too, because that whole exercise of constantly scrolling and viewing everyone's lives and images, it can become a little toxic.
Yeah, and it's also like the issue with it is that like when you're looking on someone's Instagram, you're looking at someone as they are at this moment and not how they got to that, like where they are. So like you're kind of completely disregarding like all the work that they put in to get there.
And sometimes their best selves. Sometimes you don't see
Right, you don't see the struggle.
They're like up at 3 a.m. struggling, crying, like I have this deadline that's due tomorrow. But I was also thinking about like considering your field, fashion. I know for a lot of people, when starting to share their brand, like fashion designs and like things that you make, you know, your worries are people stealing your designs, or for example, Zara or Urban Outfitters making a mock of what you just made, you know, for a cheaper price, almost like devaluing like all the hard work you put in, because they can easily send like a sketch draft to their manufacturer in China and just boom, produce like 10,000 and then make sales like that. So it's like, I understand that, but then I remember briefly watching an interview that you had, Joshua, where you were talking about like sometimes taking that as a form of flattery.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not necessarily in that context, but sometimes I feel like the best way to look at it is that, because you know that you have something that's super valuable, which is this right here. It's like you have all these ideas, you're working for yourself, you know, you have your own brand, so you just keep pushing and keep producing your work, and then also start learning about how to protect your work and like licensing and trademarking. Like that's what I'm learning about now as far as like trying to protect my work or image, and even just kind of just not paying attention to people comparing my work to others. Like that can eat you up, so.
I think Instagram's super important in the sense that I think if you're a creative today, you can't not have it. Like Myles, I've gotten so much work through Instagram. People have reached out and booked me, or I'll have brands reach out to me and I'll do a shoot and I'll be like, how'd you find my work? And they'll be like, oh, someone I follow on Instagram reposted your image or whatnot. So I think it's super important because in a way now I feel like people look at my Instagram as my portfolio more than my actual website sometimes. So, I kind of don't understand when I meet freelance artists who are like, oh, I don't really do social media. I'm like, well, then you're not going to be doing much later, it's like that's the future. But on the same note, I think you can't let it distract you from making your actual work. If you're a designer, you should be spending most of your time designing. And if you're a photographer, you should be spending your time taking photos. And then Instagram is an important part of that, but I think it shouldn't distract you from actually doing what you're making. And the other thing I'm gonna say is that I think Instagram's amazing in the sense that if you make good work and you put it out there, people will find you. And I think there hasn't been a platform like that in the past to that effect, where absolutely. Millions of people could find your image and like it, or whatever, add it to their mood board or whatnot. So I think it's important, but don't let it distract you from your core work.
Yeah, I think Instagram's important. I mean, other reasons, I found my fiance on there, which is kind of cool. She's right there. That's social media, you find your boo sometimes. But when it comes to work, I feel like if you're not creating, you're consuming, you know what I mean? And if you're consuming, just let it be something with purpose. So I feel like as an artist, if you're not putting product on Instagram and you're just on there, like your Instagram's product, you know what I mean? Like they make money off your time on there, your data, who you like, how you like, and all that other good stuff. So I'm like, it's a give and take economy. So it is what it is in a lot of ways. It's similar to everybody else. Like a lot of work I've got has been through Instagram, but Instagram is probably where I go to show things, but on Twitter, like I actually talk about those things. I get more personal on Twitter. So people may connect to me differently on Twitter than they do on Instagram, because on Instagram, I don't want to write long captions and all that other stuff. But on Twitter, I might just talk about, I don't know, like Beyonce's performance or whatever in a different way, But you have stories, you have different elements. But for me, I post on Instagram, then I just get out the app, and then I'll take another hour, like later in the day, to go respond to people. Because I have a couple brands I got to manage and all that other stuff. So I don't go on there, post, then like wait for people, then like comment, and like I just post on there, then I close the app, then I go do other things, go to work, do what I have to do. Then later in the day, open it up, respond to those people, close it again. Because sometimes it could also like influence how you create, because you see certain type of aesthetic getting popular. You'd be like, okay, maybe I should be on this wave, because everybody's on this wave. So it's just really like knowing yourself. But to the reference that you mentioned earlier, I was just talking about how imitation is a form of flattery sometimes, but it could also suck in a way. So it's just as human beings, we just imitate ever since we were kids. We see somebody talk a certain way, we see somebody move a certain way. It just kind of formed our whole identity. And I think artists, I'm not saying it's okay to steal per se, but your third step might be somebody else's sixth step, or your sixth step might be somebody else's second. So with Instagram, it's just showing you a sizzle moment and a trailer of people's lives and their work. But like they were saying earlier, you just don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So it's hard to take a full judgment on that. Like I'll take a fraction of a judgment till I speak to that person and get like added info. But other than that, I take it serious because yes, like work is on there. But like Kimberly was saying, there's creative directors that have like 300 followers, but like they have that job that's paying them like $300K a year. So they don't care to get on social media. Now things are changing. You have people like me putting creative director in my bio like overnight and still like working towards that. So I feel like the worlds are just between a traditional like agency model and work in industry and the newness that's happening now where people are just waking up and be like, I want to be an artist, which I think is powerful. Like, I don't think we should ever take away the fact that somebody could wake up tomorrow and be like, I am a photographer, not aspiring, like I am, like, and I'll get to the places that I need to. So I love social media.
We have time for one last question. Thank you. Thank you, Carly.
Kind of a strong question, but yet personal. Okay, hello, my name is Kevin, and the issue I have is, how do you cope with being overwhelmed as far as being overly booked but trying to be a full-time student? Because I was put in a situation where I decided to take a year off of school, and I gradually had my Instagram go crazy, and when I decided to finally go back to school, that kind of set me back as far as making money, being overly booked, and it's kind of hard to do both as far as being a full-time student and perfecting my craft.
Yeah, I mean, I just left school. I don't know, but
I feel like it's a
No,
matter
for me,
of
it's like, you
goals,
wanna-
right?
absolutely, it depends on your goals. And for me, it was literally like, do you want to go to Brazil? Or do you want to go to sociology class? And I was like, yo.
That's the situation.
I know, like, yeah, you gotta, I'm not saying to drop out, but I'm just saying, from my perspective, I just spoke to my parents, and my dad was like, you could do this for a year, and if it doesn't work, you need to go back to school. But, I mean, everybody doesn't have the same path. Like, you may need some of the academic structure you're gonna get here in the next 2-3 years, but it's just about balancing what you want. Like, the school's doors are always open. Of course, the tuition might be crazy, but I think it's just a personal choice on where you see yourself, because it's never too late. Like, if your work is valuable, like, tomorrow's gonna be valuable next year. So that's also something to keep in mind. Like, it's not like you need to make a split decision right now for your whole career, but it's all up to you, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I think that there's and of course I speak as a person with a college degree, but I do think that there's a way that there's, what?
No, it's a shade.
Oh no, but I mean, it's like, it's a weird thing, right? Where it's like some of the most, like the people I'm looking at right now didn't go to school. They also don't have the debt, right? And so there is something to be said for what your particular goal is. Like Thelma, one of my like biggest idols in the world, didn't go to grad school. Like, it's so hard to be the director of a museum without a PhD, let me tell you. But she had reached a point in her career, and I don't want to overtell her story, but it's like she was doing the job that she would have gone to school to do. And like that was my hustle from jump. Like when I met her when I was a sophomore, I was like, I'm not going to grad school. I'm going to figure out a way to do it without it. And of course, it's different when you have a BFA. I think it especially operates differently in the world of photography because you kind of do need an MFA to get to a certain level. But you can come back. Like, I know tons of people who went to Yale, which is like one of the best art schools in the country, who don't have a BFA. And so it's like, if you want to have the path of like working your ass off and making amazing work, take it. If you want to have the path of this very like hyper rigorous academic path, go for it. But I think you know the answer. It's just a matter of like, one, you don't want to be like the fast fashion thing because that's not sustainable. But if you feel like this is really your committed passion, like why put it off?
You're right.
Yeah.
And lastly, how do you manage your time properly as far as being overbooked? 'Cause I'm pretty sure most of you are
it's
overbooked.
definitely hard. I mean, I definitely relate to you because I'm like in the middle of it too. Like, I'm a full-time student, I work as a resident advisor, and I'm a freelance photographer. So like, I guess like the way that I deal with it is just like, I mean, like I've definitely like turned down stuff because like I had class or like tried to navigate my like school with like my freelance stuff. And it's really difficult, especially when you get like really cool opportunities. Like I had to turn down like a really cool job because my studio professor was like, you're gonna fail if you like miss another class. And just like, I guess like talking to my parents was like helpful in like trying to figure stuff out. And like, I guess when I was talking to them, they were like, you went to New York to go to school and like that is your priority right now. And like, so that's kind of like how I've made the decisions and stuff based on like what jobs I do take and what jobs I don't. I mean, like right now I'm in like a pretty good rhythm of where like I don't really take on too much where I'm like super overwhelmed, where I'm like sacrificing school for like work. So yeah, I think it's just like a matter of like balance in terms of like what you think is most important in your life and like prioritizing.
I think I want to say just, I think Kimberly said a good word, sustainability. Coming back to your work and school thing, I think if you think, it seems like you have a good problem here. So if the work is sustainable, like financially over a long period of time, then I think that's totally fine to do that. Because, you know, I have thought to myself, mid through art school, I kind of went, oh, with this tuition, I could go buy all this equipment and, you know, invest into the business and start the company. You know what I mean? Rent the studio and all of this. But I think for me, even though I was getting jobs here and there, it wasn't sustainable. It's not like I was able to just drop out of school and make a living. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of thought, you know, maybe I'll finish the program.
It's like a gamble, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's also like if you want to end up in a museum collection. So if you're like thinking about being a fine art photographer versus a commercial photographer, it's like you have to think about like who are your idols and what are their paths, and not to say that yours has to match, but there's a lot of different ways to do the thing you want to do. Like I feel like that's kind of what we're both trying to say,
definitely.
too.
And also, you make a good point. If it's fine art photography that you're planning on pursuing, then I would say school is really important in a lot of ways. But if you want to be a fashion photographer, a celebrity photographer, like no one's ever asked me to see a degree. Like, you know, so that's not, it's not necessarily going to help you, but rather just the education you get and what you learn from there really does. For me, it really influenced kind of how my images came together, was the classes and having the discussions with other students and professors about the work. And I think that was really useful, that you're not going to find once you leave school, because I think that's what I miss the most about school, is having an honest discussion with people who are passionate about what you do. Because once you get out of school, you're not going to get that. You're going to have friends and family who aren't in your industry, who don't know anything about what you do, just telling you your shit's great because they love you.
Right.
So they're going to be like, oh, this is amazing. Like, you're so talented.
Yeah.
But like, you're not getting honest feedback. Whereas when you're in school, you really get that feedback from peers and other people who.
And your classmates and peers are your network. So it's like, once you graduate, like for me, once I graduated from Parsons, like I still am following a lot of the people that I was like in freshman class with on like Instagram, following what they're doing. And like, if I ever want to collaborate them, or my friends, I'm like, oh my God, like you do this, I do that, let's try to collaborate. Like my friend went to the same high school as me, and she went to FIT, studied fashion, I studied integrated design. I had this painting that she really liked, and she turned it into a pattern for me. And then she made me a coat, and then we're collaborating, and we're selling these coats. And I'm like, yo, this is so dope. So it's like, if you do decide to stay in school, think about that. Also think about, I'm not sure what your financial situation is. Like if you have loans that you know you need to pay off, and you decide to stay in school, think of a plan of like how you're gonna have hopefully a smooth transition out of school, so that you already know how you're going to tackle those, while also being able to pursue what you went to school for and what you're trying to do after school. Because like my situation is like, I'm starting to pay off my loans. Right after school, I like started working full-time in retail. I still work there part-time. And then that's when the Dior Opportunity came, and I was working full-time in retail, dying, trying to like send my designs to them, because I'm like, oh my God, this might make me get out. But then like, I mean, I'm still there, you know, just trying to progress and take the right steps, strategic moves, so that I can eventually, you know, freelance full-time or start my own pattern design brand or whatever it is I'm trying to work towards, and use what I got from whatever freelance opportunities to put into my projects, my personal like growth. So a lot to consider, yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. If you could help me give a hand to our panelists. So that concludes our discussion. As far as a sort of informal reception, you're welcome to kind of come and mingle with our panelists and speak with them briefly. But again, thank you for spending your Friday evening with us and having this discussion. Have a great evening. Thank you.